All right, welcome everyone. It's episode 3 of the webinar series that we are doing between RevBrains and Winning by Design. I'm George, co-founder of RevBrains. With me today is Beth. Once again, the second Wednesday, I'm speaking with Beth. Beth is a revenue architect at Winning by Design. We are discussing the revenue architecture models, the scientific approach of how to apply those revenue architecture models. And last time, we started the conversation around, first of all, what the models are, how we can apply those. And today we are going to do a little bit of more, let's say, we're going to dive deeper into that. And we are also going to look at some of the most common mistakes people are making when they're implementing those models. So, hi, Beth. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you again. And let's start maybe, because we have just 40 minutes and we have a lot of content to cover, right?
We do. Yeah. Let's get into it.
Right. All right.
All right. So last time, as you said, we talked about what revenue architecture is and the different models. So just to remind and refresh everybody, there's 6 different scientific models. There's the revenue model, the data model, mathematical model, go-to-market model, growth model, and operating model. And a couple things to remember. One is that just in general, models are not precision tools, they're diagnostic tools. So they're guides, they help you ask better questions. And it's funny, when we were talking about this topic today, it's how to apply these to your business. And I like to think about it almost just like a toolkit. So if you're a carpenter, if you're building something, you're going to reach in and depending on what you're building, grab one kind of tool. If you're going to modify something, you're going to have a different approach. If you're going to repair something, you'll have a different approach. So there's no one way to apply these. It's going to depend on the situation, but I'm going to talk about some different examples of how to begin. One of the first things that I like to do is talk about where your company is in its journey. Different companies require different things, and this seems really simple, but it's actually something that is easy to forget. If you are a startup, what you need to be focused on and doing is not the same as if you are in the scale-up stage, which is also not the same as if you're in a grown-up stage. And the reason this can be a little tricky is because if you are watching another company that you're impressed by and you want to model yourself after, you might be looking at them and saying, well, their numbers are this, or they're doing that. I want to do that too. But if you're not in the same stage, it might not be the right thing for you yet. So just starting out, understanding where you're at in your journey is kind of a good step one, I think.
Right. I think when we're discussing the, for example, startup phase and then scale-up phase, what I've noticed very often, sometimes people, especially first-time founders, it's very hard sometimes for them to really, let's say, figure out when it's the time when they have really found out this product market fit and when it really is the time to go to the next phase. So what would your kind of tip would be here?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good point. And a couple of tips we're going to go through in the next slide. I'll show the growth model and the different steps to follow. But just to focus on that for 1 second, to your point, in this startup phase, one of the most important things that you can do is learn, right? And like sometimes you just want to figure it out. You want to have the answer already. And that's great, but you really need to learn here. So to your question, if we look at this growth curve, so what you're looking at is part of the growth curve of a healthy recurring revenue company. This is how it would move. And the letters represent seed funds and then an A round and B round. Again, not precision, but generally. Yep. The percentages represent the number of companies that actually make it successfully through each round. But the important thing on this slide is that when you're using the growth model, which is what this is, there's a series of different key moments and they build on each other. And it's important that you as a founder or an executive work through these different key moments that align to different points in the journey. So just thinking about it, you can actually see where a lot of the other models come into play. When you're starting out and you're figuring out product market fit, one of the first things you need to do is determine the details of your revenue model. Is it going to be a subscription? Is it going to be annual, multi-year? Is it going to be a usage model? Whatever those things might be. Then as you move along, in the beginning, likely your founders are going to be closing a lot of deals with you. That's great. But at some point, you need to get the founder out of every single deal and have them focusing on the strategy and capture what they do so that a salesperson can take that over. And then you need to get the data model and so on and so forth. So these are the different steps that you want to work through as you move along this curve. And if you skip any of them, it likely will come back to you in some way, shape, or form.
Right, exactly. It was yesterday, by the way, when I was speaking with a co-founder of a relatively fresh company. So they are still right now trying to find this product market fit. And he told me this turned out to be 10 times harder than I expected,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And it's very natural, I think, to want to rush and you want to figure out everything really quickly. You're excited, you have a good idea, you want to get in there, but really spending the time here to get those right foundational pieces and really get that product market fit. And then really making sure you have the go-to-market fit. It's so much better to take time and get that right rather than try to rush to scale too fast. And we'll talk about mistakes in a little bit. So one thing I'll point out is the third thing here is the data model. So this is a really important early one. And this almost regardless of what situation you're in, I always tell people the best time to get your data model in place is most likely today, if not yesterday. It's always going to be harder because you're always going to have more data. Your business is always going to get more and more complex. So if you haven't put your data model in place, this is critical. And the things to know about the data model are be very clear on your definitions. What does an MQL mean for you? What does an SQL mean for you? Make sure everybody's on the same page. Make sure you are tracking the data points across the whole bow tie, not just the acquisition side, but also time to onboarding, retention rates, expansion, what kinds of expansion. You want to get all those things in place and they have to be accurate. You need to be able to trust this data.
Right. By the way, I've received a question recently specifically around the data model, which was from go-to-market leader at a company that had two go-to-market motions. And they had, for the two go-to-market motions, they had different key moments, and they were trying to figure out the best way to also not just think of like what the names are of life cycle stages or key moments, but also what's the best way to put those in your CRM, in your system in general. So can we give any recommendations here? I know it's more of a revenue operations topic as well. Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's super important. I'm glad you asked that. So a couple of things. One is that if you have more than one segment, so let's say you're running enterprise and mid-market, or even different products, or it could be regions, you need to have a unique data model for each of those because they're going to tell different stories. What enterprise deals, the way that they work, how long they take, where they get stuck, all of those things are going to be different than they will for mid-market or SMB. So you want to have different data models so you can accurately track what's going on within the different kind of chunks of your business. And in terms of how to do that in your CRM, the biggest thing is just holding people accountable to making sure they're putting accurate data into your CRM to begin with. Nobody loves admin work, but it's part of the job and it's important. And then I've seen, this is more like you said of a RevOps question. I've seen a lot of people just using tools like Looker or whatever to like pull out the data and capture it in more of a dashboard or illustrative way so that the teams can use it. But this is why RevOps is so important early on, making sure that you have somebody who's responsible for caring for that data and can produce it in a consumable way for the leadership to use.
Exactly. And I would say this question really of how to implement those key moments or lifecycle stages, if we have several different, let's say, go-to-market motions or products or whatever, it's sometimes very tricky and there is no single, answer to that. Sometimes it requires a little bit more of analysis to reply to such a question. But HubSpot, Salesforce, the most popular CRMs that especially recurring revenue companies are using, there are a lot of best practices when it comes to that. So if someone wants to get into more detail on those, happy for me also to walk anybody through some best practices.
Absolutely, yeah. The biggest thing to remember is the data model is one thing. And what you want to do is just understand what the journey looks like from getting people's attention, creating prospects, moving over into discovering the impact you can provide. Is it a priority to their business? All the different steps, and then the post-sale journey as well. And this is different than the key moments in the growth model. Those are key moments for your business. These are key moments for your customers. And you want to track those so you know, again, where things are getting stuck or what's working and what's not. Which is a really nice segue into this one, because one of the things that we talked about, once you have product market fit, the second real focus of the stages that we talked about a couple minutes ago is getting your go-to-market motion aligned. And when I say go-to-market motion, just to be clear, I mean the marketing, sales, customer success, and really RevOps things that go along with it that make you successful. And this is probably one of the simplest models to explain, and it is one of the hardest for companies to implement. Because you can see in here, the blue boxes represent sales motions, the gray ones represent marketing motions, and the pink ones represent post-sale motions. And the important thing to remember is just from a logical unit economic standpoint, you want to make sure that what you are spending and the level of touch that you have in your marketing, sales, and CS motions makes sense for the ACV that you're pulling in for a certain set of deals. So, for example, if you have an enterprise product and SMB product, you're not going to have the same level of touch, the same marketing motion, the same sales motion, the same support motion after the sale. They're going to be different. And so in this model, you can kind of use it again as a guide, not a precision tool, for where your average ACV might be for a band, and then what kind of motions, go-to-market motions you should have. And they should be aligned not just with the ACV, but with each other too.
Right. Maybe let's now move to the mistakes, as I'm also very curious to discuss those. Yeah. If there are any questions, maybe we can get back to the go-to-market motions model as well.
Definitely. All right. So mistake number one, and these are in no specific order, by the way. This is just, there's a number of things that come up very frequently. I think this is a really important one. Not being customer centric enough. Everybody says that they're customer centric, but at the end of the day, if you are thinking about your organization and your product, and if you look at a call recording or you look at a deck that you're presenting to a prospect, and if most of the content talks about your business and your company and your features and what you do and your roadmap, then you are likely not as customer centric as you think. The conversations and the way you think about it need to focus on the problems that your prospects or customers have and the impact to their business that will come by solving them. And it's a reorientation. And this is one so often that I see just getting missed. Whatever kind of methodology you use, this one is SPICE. This is our Winning by Design one. It's less important what methodology you use and more that the spirit of it is there. But I'll use this to illustrate. The idea with SPICE is that if you have the right conversations around the customer's situation, the customer's pain, the customer's impact that they're looking to achieve in their business, critical events for them, then the decision to purchase your product will come. It's an outcome. You're not starting with the goal of selling. You're starting with the goal of understanding what's going on in their business and whether or not you can help them.
By the way, I very often receive the question of, okay, so right now we are at the moment of setting up our sales or go-to-market methodology, and the most common go-to-market methodologies. Very often people really get stuck into like, which methodology are we choosing, and what's your take on that? Is it really about methodology, or like how should people in general, think about this question?
Yeah, it's true. Some people get very stuck in methodologies, and I mean, I like to say, different methodologies, everyone has value. Different methodologies were created for different, very specific purposes. BANT, for example, was created in 1967 with a very specific use case, and it was very useful at that time. It's often not the best go-to qualification tool now, but it just depends on the business. So ultimately, the methodology is far less important than making sure, again, you are focusing on how you help a customer's business. It's that simple.
Right. I've seen a lot of, like in SaaS, I think the most common methodologies right now are Spiced. I've seen a lot, and also a lot of people and a lot of companies are using Medic or Medpic as well. But still, I think when it comes to Medic, it's also a little bit more geared towards businesses that are, not really the cloud-based subscription-based businesses, but more the businesses that were popular like 20 years ago, where the acquisition was super important and not so much the post-sales, the conversation.
Yeah, and ROI. And like the thing to remember about just the evolution of how people buy is sometimes, right now, if you have a problem in your business as one of my prospects, and one of your business priorities is something I can help with, then you will find the budget and you will see the ROI. So qualifying on those kind of things, I think, is less powerful because you want to go to the thing that's actually going to make the other things happen. So business priorities is ultimately what it comes down to.
Right, exactly.
So let's talk about data. Here's another one that I hear all the time. Oh, we're very data driven. I hear this always. So I say, okay, show me your data model. And that's when things start getting a little bit gray. Sometimes people don't have a full data model. They only have parts of it, or they have it, but they're not sure they can trust it. It's not completely accurate, or they don't have it split into the right segments. And again, very straightforward. You cannot use data to drive decisions if you don't have data that you can trust. So this brings me back to the point of the importance of RevOps and accountability in capturing this kind of data. I can't overstate how important this is. If you're going to proactively and scientifically build and architect a company that's going to be successful, you have to use data to do it, and you can't use data if you don't have it. So building a data model. And go ahead.
Yeah, just wanted to jump here. I've seen sometimes there is the other end of the equation where, I've seen companies that are measuring and also trying to get right too many data points and too many reports. And sometimes when you have also that kind of state, it's also hard because you cannot measure what you manage and manage what you. Did I say it correctly? Yes, exactly. Yeah. So basically, I think first of all, we need to get through the exercise of really what are the data points and reports and insights we need to generate to make sure we have the right data points after that too.
You have to think critically about that. It's easier to be complicated.
Yeah.
I think this is actually a good just mantra to remember in any business. Simple is not easy. Simple takes more work. And so looking at a data model and understanding what's important for you to track in your business to make good decisions, it takes some critical thinking and time at the front end to know what those things are you need to track. It is much easier to track everything and just the kitchen sink, throw everything into it. But that's going to be far less effective. So I love that you brought that up. Yeah, it's not about quantity, it's about quality.
Exactly.
And let's talk about some examples of what you can do once you have the data. One of the things that we like to talk about at Winning by Design is that if you can actually track the data, then you can start really understanding the nuance of where in a whole sales cycle things can be optimized. You're usually not going to have just one step from this point in your sales process to closed won. You're going to have a series of touch points, emails, meetings, whatever it might be. There's going to be a bunch of different activities. And if you can actually measure all those activities, and then you can see where things are getting stuck, and you can say, all right, well, let's do some skills training and see if we can improve the outcomes of the second step in these 5. When you start doing that mathematically, things actually start to compound and improve. So you can actually have disproportionate impact by making small adjustments during a process that can have a huge impact on your overall win rate. It's kind of like doing exercise, right? It might not feel like a lot to do 10 sit-ups every day, but when you do that for a year, you're going to see a difference, right? Same thing here. But again, you have to track the data to be able to see where you can do things that will make a difference.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think I've mentioned it last time. Just sometimes when you start doing this scenario planning, and now there are some great tools, by the way, with which we can also do scenario planning and some benchmarks as well. Just sometimes, although you know that, when you start really applying that, it could be hard. And this is where really, the mastery comes, right?
Yeah, it is. And this is where either, leaning on support at the beginning or making sure you have somebody on staff who knows how to do this. And it might take a little while to get your whole senior team aligned to it. But once you do, like what you're looking at here is just a sample of a few different data points in a data model: volume metrics, conversion rates, time metrics. And if you track the right things, when you compare different data points from the data model, you can much more accurately diagnose things going on in your business. So for example, if you look at the number of opportunities you start with and look at your win rate and compare those two, that might tell you something about the quality of your discovery call. If you look at your win rate and then you look at the quality of the onboarding, that might tell you something about the kinds of deals that you're closing. Are you closing the right deals? And so the more data points that you have and the more that you train your leadership to actually look at various data points and use it diagnostically, you can really, instead of guessing what's going wrong in your business, you can actually use math to see it. You can see in the data what's happening. And then you can be much more focused and surgical about where you're going in and doing things differently.
Right, exactly. And sometimes I've seen this attitude in some companies where, like, for example, sellers or marketing people say, okay, so this kind of planning is more subject to what the leadership team is doing or what revenue operations, is doing on an every day or weekly basis. But I think if you get that mindset, for example, as a seller, it's super important because you can optimize for yourself, right?
Yes.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. So you at one point you can achieve much better results if you understand how this mathematics works.
Yeah. And if you actually, just looking at the data model for another second, I'm a big fan of educating everybody about the whole business because, as I've said many times, it's a system. Once you get past $10 million, this is going to operate as your go-to-market revenue system. And so making sure that your salespeople understand the impact of what they do here to the teams that are active over here is important. They're connected. It's a system. You can't disengage things from one another. So it speaks to why silos are not just, they're actually like dangerous to be thinking in a siloed way. Because if you do that, then making one decision here without realizing the impact that it'll have on other parts of the system can really end up being a bad decision, and you don't realize it because you're not thinking about it systemically.
Right, absolutely.
So here's another common mistake that I see all the time: doing too much too soon. It can be very hard to say no to things. And if you're a founder and you have, let's say you start with a small and medium business subscription product, and it's great, and you're figuring out product market fit and you're starting to grow, and then suddenly you're at $5 million and a huge contract comes and some client says, I will sign a $2 million contract with you if you support me as an enterprise client right now. Ooh, great. Okay, now we're going to be enterprise also. So you're $5 million, you have a small and medium business product, and now you're going to venture into enterprise. And then you also maybe have some pro user licenses that you've gotten. It's going to be really hard to do any of those well if you don't have focus. And I'm going to show another slide in a second that shows how to think about when and how to add on new segments or new products. But knowing when to say no and when to really focus is huge. Our general rules of thumb, again, not precision tools, but rules of thumb, is that up until about $10 million, just focus on one segment, product, whatever. 20 million, 2. 50 million, then you can venture into 3. But when you do launch a second one, the idea is remembering the key moments from the growth model. These are internal business key moments. When you start out and you launch your first product, you're figuring out the revenue model, you get the founder out of the sales cycle, you build your data model, you figure out your go-to-market model, you build those repeatable processes. You need to establish all those things before you get to a point where you're ready to introduce a second segment or product. And when you do, you have to start back over with the second product. What is the revenue model going to be for that product? What is the data model for that product or segment? What is the go-to-market motion going to look like? Because it's probably going to be different. So this is the way to think about it. And it's not an overnight thing, but this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that we see is people trying to do too much too soon and saying yes to things that maybe that it's too early to say yes to.
Right. And by the way, I see some people from service businesses are also watching us. And it's very interesting because when you have a product, it still takes some time to build it, to test it out. And sometimes, for some of the things, it's natural, let's say, some of those take time. Whereas, because many of those principles, they can be applied to service businesses as well, right? But it can be very tempting because you can pull up a service, in a very fast way. But again, we need to be careful as many of those principles are really applying to the service business, the service part of the business as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And the needs of like different segments, different size customers, different industries, it's going to vary. And so if you just want to do Band-Aids all the time and like fix problems that pop up every morning, okay, but it's going to be harder to be thoughtful and deliberate about architecting your way to a successful, and exit whatever your goal is. All right, here's another very common one. So you have 3 revenue streams in a recurring revenue business. You have your acquisition revenue stream, retention revenue, and expansion revenue. And what the right balance is between those 3 revenue streams is going to vary depending on your maturity stage, which revenue model you're running, and a variety of other things, which is why the data model is important. So you know what the right balance is. But one of the biggest mistakes that we see is companies over-indexing and overly focusing on acquisition, which is important when you're early stage because you need to get customers, of course. But there's a point, and I'll say for annual subscription businesses, I'll use that as an example in particular because it's the most common where we see this. You focus on acquisition at the beginning, as you should, but then there comes a point where you have to start looking at onboarding and retention and expansion so that you can support that and don't churn out all those customers that you're acquiring. But you need to invest in that side of the bow tie, both the data and the activities, people, resources, all of that stuff. And if you don't get the right balance between those two, that can sink the whole business, truly. So making sure that you know what the right balance is for your business is absolutely critical.
Right, and I've seen many cases, and I know you have also you're also discussing that in the revenue architecture course. If you miss this point where, let's say, you don't invest enough in retention, in generally in all of those pieces that need to happen in the right side of the bow tie, and every single customer success manager really can add a lot of impact, but also like if those people are not trained or if you don't have enough of headcount in those in the right moments, it can be devastating for your organization.
Absolutely.
You have a lot of examples, by the way, I've seen that you've presented in your revenue architecture course on that.
Definitely. And right now, one trend that we're seeing, people are running very lean right now, and I get that. You need to be careful about the spend that you have, what you're spending to support your business. It can be a knee-jerk reaction can be to invest in the acquisition part and cut the post-sale part because acquisition equals growth, right? Except that not always is that true. Growth can also come from retention and expansion, and it's often cheaper to do that. So if you, to your point, overload the people who support retention and expansion, which are typically onboarding people, CSMs, those that make sure customers are getting the impact that they need to get. If you overload them or cut that, then you're going to start ending up with churn rates going up. And if you instead are trying to make up for that growth by investing in acquisition, that is going to drive your cost of acquisition up while your LTV is going down because your churn rate's up. So again, remember the system, right? So all of those things together can mean your GRR goes way down. So it's about using the math to understand what that rate balance is for you.
Exactly, and it's interesting, like just you need to understand the mathematical principles, but it's very interesting how even if your churn rate goes up by 1%, like really in revenue, in dollars, how much that could be, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, and even I always tell people at renewal time, even if you can get a 3% annual increase on the contract, that will compound year over year. It carries over. So mathematically, it will build. And so if you can avoid flat renewals, that's amazing. It doesn't have to be a huge lift, but just a little bit is a really important thing. And of course, expansion is a lever that not enough people pull. And again, yeah, here we go. Making sure when you're recurring revenue, these arrows on the right side, this is your growth engine. Again, when you're starting out, you need to lean into acquisition, but then at some point, if you look at a lot of very mature, healthy companies, they'll have more dollars coming from the base than from acquisition because they'll have tapped out their total available market. And so at this point, they're just retaining and growing from existing customers. So if you think about that, that default assumption that growth only comes from acquisition can be pretty misguided.
Right, and I think more and more companies are starting to realize that, right? And like still there are a lot of companies that are investing heavily in acquisition, only or primarily in acquisition, but I see also a trend in which more and more companies really realize the power of the second part of the bow tie. So
yeah, definitely. The thing that I like about it, and I say this as somebody who's a CS executive for many years, is that it's just math. So let's say that it takes you 15 months to pay back, to earn back the dollars that you spent to close a deal. So you need 15 months in order to cover those costs. Let's say that that deal churns at 12 months. You essentially just lost money on that customer. You wasted all of the marketing and sales dollars that you spent to get in. Whatever onboarding and minimal support you might have had was wasted. And because you didn't properly investigate or invest in that right side. That's like a simple example, but profitability comes from hanging on to customers long enough to pay off that cost of acquisition and cover any cost to serve. So it's that longevity. And that's usually, it is driven by sales teams, I will say, in that you need to get the right customers in the door. So I don't mean to say that marketing and sales is not important.
Right, and it's also, I mean, for sure, acquisition is super important. You cannot do without acquisition, of course. But just once again, let's say the win rate cannot go above 100%, right?
Exactly.
Whereas in the expansion phase of the business and retention, like this is where just if you manage to ensure the recurring impact is there, you can achieve much more.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so another common mistake that we see a lot is, you've heard me mention, it's a go-to-market system. And again, past $10 million is when it really starts operating as a system. When you're a startup, you're figuring things out. And so you can get away with things being a little bit more fast moving and maybe a little bit more haphazard because you're just trying to solve problems and learn things. But then once you get past that $10 million, it's all going to operate as a system. And far too often, this blue line represents both what the customer journey looks like, but also the internal journey. There's often so many friction points, and it's not intentional. You can have the best marketing people with the most amazing skills and experience, the best salespeople, the best onboarding people. Everybody's so well intended to do their job in the best way, but if they're not connected and nobody's caring for them as a system to build something that's more cohesive, then it's going to look like this, and this never ends well. So this is what you want to get to. And this is hard. Again, it's one of those things where it looks very easy, but easy is harder than complexity. And the only way that you really get to this is when you start making sure that everybody, certainly from leadership down, understands the relationship between all the different things. And there's a common language that ties everything together. So this goes back to the data model and like the terminology, things like that. Impact definitions, understanding what you do for customers, being very customer centric. Everybody understands this connected model, and you have that data model that everyone has visibility into and understands how their part in it impacts all the rest of it as well. And it's so easy to operate in silos. And when we're moving fast and we're stressed and there's a lot going on, even as leaders, you can look up suddenly and realize, oh my gosh, I haven't talked to the marketing team in forever. I don't know what they're doing. And again, it's not intentional, but this is an important thing for leaders to keep top of mind.
Right. And still, I've heard some leaders say, okay, but marketing and salespeople, sometimes they are so different in nature. It's so hard really to make sure alignment is there just from a character perspective. You know, sometimes marketing people and salespeople are so different. So
it can be. The thing to remember, though, is that all these teams can help each other. This is why I love to build feedback loops across the whole bow tie, because there's going to be things that your CS team learns that are going to be amazing pieces of information for product. There's going to be things that they learn that the marketing and sales team can use in storytelling and in really citing impact examples. Of course, the sales and marketing team needs to get the right kind of deals in the door. They can look at examples of those accounts that are sticking around and that are growing really well and use that to refine the ideal customer profile. So this is where, too, everyone not only having appreciation for what everybody else does, but seeing how the information other teams have can help them do their jobs better is really a big unlock.
Right. All right. I think that was the last mistake that we had. Maybe now we can leave the last few minutes that we have today for any questions that people from the audience might have. Otherwise, if we don't have any questions, what we can do for 1 or 2 minutes, but maybe we could just once again summarize those mistakes. And meanwhile, I guess.
I have a couple other slides we can talk about just to discuss maybe a little bit of what's going on in the market right now and why this stuff is so important. It's a weird time right now, and this is probably one of the things that I love most about revenue architecture personally, is that because of what's happened in the last 3 years, it's pretty clear that a lot of habits that we had in our world of recurring revenue companies and all of this, habits over the last 10 years were kind of built on the wrong premises. And those techniques are not working anymore. In fact, in some cases, they are the opposite of what we should be doing. And revenue architecture it gives the tools that kind of separates things from trends and from habits and really focuses on, okay, what do you need to get the outcomes you want?
Right, exactly. And maybe that's the right time also to put a link to the book that Jacco has written on revenue architecture. I put the link last time just in case someone has missed it. Here is the link because in Amazon, I think it's just the US Amazon, but from this link, you can buy the book for almost any European location, wherever you are in Europe. So this is the link. Really interesting times. Really interesting how the SaaS world is going to, continue in the next few years, because still SaaS is the best business model that we have so far, right?
Yeah, when it's run correctly, it can be.
Exactly.
That's the trick. I think we're definitely going to see. I'm curious to watch it over the next couple of years. I think we're going to see a big difference in groups of companies that are able to apply a lot of these concepts and use data and use that customer centricity to move forward versus those that choose a different path. I think it's going to become pretty clear in a couple of years' time who made what decisions.
Exactly. All right. Well, great. Thanks a lot, Beth. This was the third episode of the webinar series that we are running with Winning by Design. Next episode is going to be at the beginning of May. So you're going to, next week, we are not streaming a new episode, just to make sure we gather more questions, more insights, but make sure to be with us in the first Wednesday of May, when we're going to be back here with Jacco, the founder of Winning by Design. We're going to discuss recurring revenue trends in 2024, which is a topic that allows for a great discussion. So anybody has any questions, I'll make sure to collect those questions and discuss with Jacco.
I definitely encourage people to come to that. Jacco's so fun to watch, first of all, but also I love the way he talks about the trends that are going on right now, and certainly the application of revenue architecture, but we're in interesting times. So leverage his expertise.
Right, exactly. Thanks a lot, Beth. Thanks a lot, everybody who watched us, and we'll be speaking very soon. Again, we will be back at the beginning of May. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.